Hi, tonight I'm making Gabors Hungarian goulash, which she calls Dracula goulash. I have had this recipe for over 40 years. I've made it almost every Halloween. I've made it one or two times throughout the year. I've served it in the parking lot at Texas Stadium. I've taken it to a potluck before. One of my brothers really loves it, so I try to make it for him. Long before the internet, this recipe was published in a celebrity cookbook I bought that was to benefit an AIDS charity. It was either in the late 80s or early 90s. The recipe, that cookbook, disappeared with all of my cookbooks in Hurricane Harvey. But I was lucky enough to look online and find the recipe posted everywhere. So I will post a recipe link in this video, but it's easy, very easy for you to find it. Just do a search on Gabors Dracula goulash. Miss Gabors says that this is a way to get a man, keep a man, and when you don't want him anymore, quit making it. Okay, the recipe calls for stewing beef and stewing pork. I have pork shoulder and a top sirloin steak cut into chunks and red onion. And right away I'm going to do one thing that's different from the recipe. Jaja says to brown the onions and then add the meat. I'm going to add the meat first so it gets nice and brown, and then deglaze the pan with the onions. And I believe the recipe calls for oil or butter. I used both. I've got some avocado oil and some butter, and I'll start browning my meat. I am browning my meat in batches to make sure that it gets good and brown. You don't dredge it in any flour or anything, just the oil and butter and brown it. I'm sure the recipe calls for salt and pepper. I will use pepper. Possibly, I may not even with the Hungarian paprika, but I won't use salt because I am on a restricted sodium diet. So I'll just continue browning all the meat and then we'll add the onion. Okay, I've browned all the meat and now I'm going to add the red onions to the pan. And I'm going to stir these to deglaze the pan. And start to cook the onions a bit. My onions have softened, and I'm going to add the beef and pork back in. I've also added 4 crushed garlic cloves. Now at this point, the recipe calls for some paprika, and Jaja says use Hungarian paprika or don't make it at all. And that's what I'm using. And if you're familiar with Hungarian paprika, it is spicy. So I probably will use maybe, she's vague on it. She says use enough to make it red. I probably will use maybe 4 tablespoons total, but I'm going to use half of it now. I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of Hungarian paprika and about 2 tablespoons of caraway seed. It's hard when you're a cook to follow a recipe. unless you're baking. So I'm going to stir in the paprika and the caraway seeds and let them brown a little here in my Dutch oven. And next I'm going to add red wine. The recipe calls for a bottle of red wine. Since I'm making half, I bought this, which is equivalent to half a bottle of red wine. The wine has come to a boil. I'm going to cover it, turn it down to a very low simmer, and simmer it for about 2 hours. So the meat is very, very tender. Okay, I've simmered my meat, onions, and wine for almost 2 hours. The meat is very tender. And now I'm going to make my next additions. Miss Gabors says use more paprika, and she says enough to make it red. That's not very specific, is it? I'm going to add about another tablespoon, because remember, this is the hot Hungarian paprika. You can always add more. We like things spicy at this house. The next two ingredients I'm cutting in half from the recipe. In other words, even though I'm making half the recipe, I'm putting in 1/4 of what the recipe calls for, because these are ingredients that are high in sodium, and I need to reduce that in my diet as much as possible. So I've got some Polish sausage, some Polska kielbasa. The recipe says Hungarian or Polish sausage. I don't think I've ever actually seen Hungarian sausage. So this is just the regular Polska kielbasa, and this is this is 1/2 of the package. The next ingredient would be 2 pounds of rinsed sauerkraut, 4 pounds in the whole recipe. So by rights, I should be adding 2 pounds, and I love sauerkraut, and this is rinsed, but because of the sodium, I'm just putting in 1 pound. And this is some live sauerkraut. This is from Trader Joe's, so it actually has a few little pieces of cucumber in too. So I'm going to put the lid back on and simmer this again for 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, the sausage and sauerkraut have cooked about 20 minutes. You want to cook it 20 to 30. And the last two ingredients are chopped fresh parsley and sour cream. Now, I'm not going to be putting the parsley in now because it's dark outside. I don't want to go outside in the dark and pick parsley, and I'm really making this for tomorrow anyway, because it's as good as it is, it's even better after it's mellowed in the refrigerator overnight and you have it as a leftover. But for goodness sake, if you live in the West, the only sour cream to get is Knutson Hampshire sour cream. It's absolutely delicious. It's so much better than Daisy or really anything else I've had. I love sour cream. I've had lots of brands. Knutson, I've only seen it in the West. Okay, I've stirred in about a cup, and we'll put some more on top. So here's a bowl of our finished Dracula goulash. It's good with noodles, with potatoes, with green vegetable, a salad, more cabbage, like fried cabbage or a coleslaw. Delicious. And of course, at this point, I would sprinkle over the fresh parsley. Give it a try.